I'm so glad to be back here. Thank you, Dr. Ho. Thank you, Sally, for inviting me. And I have so much to share that let's just get right started. So just a little bit of background about me, in case you might not know. I'm from Oakland University it's not in California, as many people often think. And instead, I am from Oakland University in Michigan, which is really cold, and that's me going to work on a typical February day. And I teach this course called Learning How to Learn, and my co-instructor is Terry Sinowski. And this is Terry going to work on a typical February day. He really is in Southern California. And that's one of the great things about online teaching, is that not only can students get together from all over the world, but even faculty can get together from very different places. Now, to my shock, I was invited to speak at Harvard. I was a nervous wreck, because it's like Harvard. I walked in the room and I became even more nervous because it was packed, standing room only, all around the edges. And I thought, why are there so many people here? Turns out our one little course, made for less than $5,000, mostly in our basement. This is like a pan shot of my basement to make it look bigger, had on the order of the same number of students as all of Harvard's massive open online courses and online courses put together, made for millions of dollars with hundreds of people. And what this tells you is that people all around the world are starved for fresh information about how we truly learn. Think about it. If you'd asked a school of education to provide us a course, an online course on learning, you would have gotten 3 weeks on the history of education, 3 weeks on theories of education, 3 more weeks on how babies learn, and maybe a little bit at the end about how you truly learn, but hardly any neuroscience, because that's too difficult. But we turned all that on its head and built the course from neuroscience using metaphor to help us advance even complicated ideas. So we are now in a day and age of generative AI. It's a revolution. Everybody knows that, and especially educators, because generative AI has pulled the rug out from under us. We can't use essays anymore or homework and so forth to help people with their learning. So part of what I'm going to talk about here today relates to generative AI and our brain. So we might as well start with a little tiny bit of history of generative AI. Now, in 2017, there was a paper published called Attention is All You Need. And this was published in the Neural Information Processing Systems Conference, which sounds like a pretty boring conference, but actually it's the biggest conference in all of AI. This year it had some 18,000 registrants. Typically when registration opens, it fills up within less than 10 minutes. So enter your registration fast when it opens for next year. But this paper was entered there. Now, it turns out that my co-instructor, Terry Sinowski, is the president of the Neural Information Processing Systems Conference. And Terry told me, when they submitted this paper, we thought it was a nothing burger. It seemed pretty complex. So we assigned it. The reviewers said, put it off in a corner to be given by a grad student. And it turns out this paper is so important, it has now been cited over 150,000 times. Why? Because it introduced the idea of the transformer. And the transformer is the brain of ChatGPT. It's how generative AI works. What is a transformer anyway? If you look, it's got two basic parts. It's got an encoder where you feed your prompt in, like, what's the best restaurant in Singapore? And then you'll get the output here, and it will tell you the answer, hopefully, to your prompt. Now, we are not so much interested in the inner workings of that transformer. What we're really interested in here today is that the flow of information through a transformer in AI is remarkably similar to the flow of information through the human brain. And this is no surprise, because actually when artificial intelligence experts were trying to develop the field, they would say, well, what's the most intelligent thing we know of on Earth? Sometimes at least. And it's, of course, the human brain. So AI experts would go to neuroscientists and say, can you help us advance some of these ideas? And similarly, when neuroscientists would get stuck, they'd turn to AI experts and say, can you model this aspect of the human brain? So artificial intelligence has gone through long periods where they call it the winter of AI, where people say, no, you can never devise anything similar to human intelligence. Those were the AI winter periods. And actually, neuroscience and AI have progressed together through the summers and the winter periods of the development of each field. So it's no surprise that they're actually similar to one another. But what this means is, if we know just a little bit about how the human brain actually learns, we can use AI more effectively. And if we understand a little more about AI, we can use our brains more effectively. So that's what we're going to be talking about here today. We know now that when you are learning something, you've got these little things called neurons, and when you do learn something, it is actually encoded in a connected nest of neurons, which we symbolize with these little dots. And the lines between them are the connections. And we form in our brain something called a schema. And that is it's the connected collection of neurons and their connections that really underpin our expertise in whatever subject you might imagine. So if we look, as students are learning something, look, you're actually kind of filling in connections. You're weakening some connections, strengthening some connections, and this is how you acquire, gradually, expertise in whatever you're studying. So let's say that I was maybe studying Japanese. So I'd have a schema in some sense of Japanese, another of chemistry, biology. Look, you can tell they don't know much history, geography, and so forth. Now I'm showing all these schemas as separate, but in reality they're kind of three-dimensional and intertwined with one another in the brain. And of course, the different subjects kind of work together. You learn physics, you learn math, and they each support one another in whatever you're learning. Ultimately, we can think of everything you're learning not only in school, but even cultural aspects, ideas about how to interact with one another. These are all a part of our identity schema that is sort of integral to how we're thinking about things, and it's stored in the neocortex of our brain. And what is really going on is when we're learning something, we're creating sort of a connected set of linked neurons. And the more we practice with those neurons, the stronger and richer those connections get. And that's sort of the foundation of our knowledge or expertise in whatever we're learning. And it's important. Well, one thing I want to emphasize is when it comes to teaching, one of the best ways to teach is to use metaphor. And so, for example, let's say that you learn how like even when you were a baby, you played with water and you get sort of the sense of how water flows and the current of water. And you're essentially creating a set of linked neurons that underpin your understanding of the flow of water, a current of water. Once you have that, that's like your prior knowledge, and you can use that prior knowledge to more easily explain through metaphor new ideas, like the flow of water is similar to the flow of electrical current. So, surprisingly for me, so when I was working on the book, A Mind for Numbers, I reached out. Have you all ever heard of a website called ratemyprofessors.com? Well, there's a way you can go to Rate My Professors, and you can download the names of the top teachers, teaching professors in the English-speaking world. And so I downloaded the names of thousands of top professors, like in teaching economics, engineering, psychology, and I got all these names, and I got all their emails. And I emailed them, and I asked them if they would like to look at the manuscript for the book, A Mind for Numbers. Shocking percentages of them said, sure, I'd be glad to look. And they gave me some really good insight. So the book has done really well. It sold over 1 million copies. And I have to say, I think it's due to their input and ideas that really added to things. But one thing that surprised me was many of these top professors would say, I do this one thing, and that's the magic that makes me a great teaching professor. But I don't tell anybody else what this technique is. And what was that technique? It was the use of metaphor and analogy. And the reason they wouldn't tell other professors was because other professors would say, oh, so that's why you're seen as such a good teacher. You just make it so easy on your students. But isn't that our job as professors, as teachers? Learning is really hard. And anything we can do to kind of help reduce that friction and make things stick in students' minds can really help our students. So when I say the value of metaphor, there's great value in metaphor. And you will see throughout this presentation, I will use metaphor all the time. But where on earth do you find, metaphors? And we also need to keep aware of the fact that, a metaphor can break down. We know that at a quantum level, water flow is not a good analogy for the flow of electrical current. But every metaphor always breaks down, even mathematical equations. And so when it breaks down, you just throw it away and you get a new metaphor. But again, how do we come up with metaphors? use ChatGPT. I remember to me, it was like a religious revelation when I began to realize how easy it is to get these great metaphor ideas. You could ask, so for example, let's say you're teaching Python programming is really okay. So you're trying to teach about main guard and scope. Well, you ask for a metaphor, and main guard is like the gatekeeper of a castle. Scope are like the rooms within a castle. It gives you lots more information besides. Don't just ask for one metaphor. You ask for 3 metaphors, 5 metaphors. Maybe tell it your hobby or something that your students are interested in. And you'll get wonderful ideas for metaphors. And also, don't be afraid to ask for a mnemonic metaphor, a memory that will boost also the student's ability to remember what you're trying to teach. So these are all nice little ways to use AI to help you with your learning and your teaching. But remember, links in long-term memory are what learning is all about. As Eric Kandel, the Nobel Prize-winning scientist, said, memory is everything. And it is true that we need to remember what we truly want to work with. Without those links of knowledge within your brain, you cannot think critically about AI. I had both of my daughters in Kuhlmann mathematics for 10 years. So according to many constructivist approaches, Kuhlmann mathematics is bad. That's terrible because it's a bunch of rote repetition and practice. But actually, it's very carefully designed by Toru Kuhlmann, the mathematics educator who originated this concept, so that you can begin to get a feel of the relationships between numbers as you are practicing with them. And so I put my daughters in Kuhlmann mathematics, starting from age 3. My older daughter, she's like the perfect child. Mommy, may I do my Kuhlmann mathematics practice now? And so that was great. But our younger daughter, she hated math, thought of herself as an artist, and she is a very good artist. And she said, I do not want to learn math. And I thought, I'm a mom. 20 minutes a day, most days, is not going to kill her. And I'm just going to insist on my one thing. I love tiger moms, but I'm too lazy to be a tiger mom. So I was like a tiger mom with only one paw, And my one paw was, okay, you got to do your 20 minutes of math. So we go through 10 years of me every day pushing a rope, to get my younger daughter to do it. And then she goes out, she gets her degree in studio art, goes out in the working world and hates it. It's really, really hard to make it as an artist. But she did see these patterns in marketing. So she thought, she decided to go back to the university, get her master's in statistics. So she goes back, she gets her master's, and then I ran into the son of her graduate advisor who she wrote papers with when I was in Vietnam. And he said, Barb, I just don't understand it. My father never usually takes American students who've gone through the American schooling system because they simply do not have a feel for the numbers. What was different about your daughter? I was like, 10 years of Kuhlmann mathematics, that's the difference. And you know what? That 10 years of tiny pushes each day, she didn't want to do it, it ends up, now she has a job as a data analyst. She's a really good manager. She loves her work. And as her hobby, she integrates math and art. So it's really pretty cool. So getting a sense of the patterns through practice can really be valuable, but I'm going to also come to a little thing towards the end of our talk where I'll show you how to make it even more creative. So, one thing I just want to emphasize here is that AI shows us how to do things. But you know what? I'm the only one who knows. So let's say this together. AI shows, but I'm the only one who knows. And that's a mantra we can take away from this talk. But I want to show you something I think is really interesting, and that is that we have a large language model like ChatGPT within our own brain. I had mentioned that we've got these links in our long-term memory. But I was tricking you. I always like to trick you. So there's two ways that we can lay those links. There's two different types of links. And the first type of link is like, we take information in working memory. So do most of you understand what working memory is? Okay, so what do you call a person who speaks two languages? How about one language? An American. So I'm a typical American. You know, I grew up speaking only one language. I learned a second language when I went to the Defense Language Institute. I should have studied lots of different languages, I wish, but I found that language learning is really important, and I think that's one of the great skills underpinning Singapore, is so many individuals are bi or trilingual. And what is happening? Your working memory is holding, when you're translating something, you're temporarily holding a sentence in one language in mind as you are working with it to translate it to another language. So working memory takes in information from the outside and it puts it through the hippocampus weakly into long-term memory. This is called the declarative pathway. So this is also, declarative also kind of means the pathway of lecture. So when I'm speaking with you here, information is coming from my mouth and from these images. It's going into your working memory and through your little hippocampus weakly into long-term memory. Okay, I am lecturing. Are you learning something? I hope. Wait, but haven't we been told that lecture is bad? Think about it. If you had come in here and for the last half an hour I had said, okay, now I want you to get into groups and I want you to talk to each other and see what learning actually is, would you have gotten nearly as much as what this lecture was able to convey? So keep that in mind. Now, what's the second pathway? It's the automatic pathway, and that goes through the basal ganglia. Have you ever gotten into a car or gotten into a bus and just gone home for the 100th time, and then suddenly you find yourself at home and you can't even remember how you got there? That's because you have gone home enough times that you've laid these habitual links, and those are links you don't even need to think about. You can do things unconsciously, and that's how you got home. But you need both types of links to be able to function effectively in society, for the most part. And to look at this in a slightly different way, Have you heard of the book by Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow? Okay, so this blue box represents that declarative pathway. And that is Daniel Kahneman's slow system. And this automatic pathway, that's going to be represented by this orange box. So that's Kahneman's fast system. So let's play a game together. Okay, which one am I pointing towards? Slow or fast? Slow. Fast. Okay, you got it. Okay. So let's kind of break this apart a little bit so we can see what's really going on with different types of learning. Now, we've got this working memory, which we're conscious of. And if we are working, let's say, through a math problem, we go step by step, we're conscious of what we're learning, and we can see whether we got the right answer, for example. This is the pathway the pathway of explanation. And this is all, educators often confuse this pathway and think that all learning involves this pathway. So they will say things like, if you can't explain it, which involves this pathway, you don't understand it. Is that always true? No, because it is true through this pathway. But this pathway, we can learn, we're completely unconscious of our learning, and we can't even explain how we learn through that pathway. For example, let's say I want to hit a baseball. I'm going to learn how to hit a baseball. So my working memory kind of says, hey, basal ganglia, hit the baseball. So I hit it, and I see which direction the baseball went, but I have no idea how I am learning to hit that baseball. So I hit it again and again, and I get better and better at hitting the baseball, but it's almost like magic. I am learning through this system, but I don't know how I'm learning. What is the magic behind this system? It is a deep neural net. And that, not to say there aren't deep neural nets elsewhere, but this one we're really beginning to understand. And in this basal ganglia system, incidentally, if you want to read a great book on the basal ganglia, Guy Bergman's The Hidden Life of the Basal Ganglia is a riveting thriller. So let's say you're hitting a baseball. So you hit it, and the signal propagates through your basal ganglia, and you hit the baseball. You hit it again, you hit it again, and as you're hitting it, you're kind of strengthening some connections, you're weakening other connections, and this is how you gradually form your ability, your expertise to hit that baseball. What's really quite interesting is this value function, this set of weighted links, is remarkably similar to how large language models are trained. That's how we're trained. But you might say, now wait a minute, you just talked about physical skills, but large language models have to do with talking, with speech. So what does this have to do with that? This is where my little granddaughter comes in. Okay, so my little granddaughter, she's like, mama. My daughter hears her say, mama. She goes, oh, let's reward her. Oh, look, she said mama. And in fact, this basal ganglia system is how we learn our native language. It's why we can be quick, intuitive, fast with our native language. Now, I learned Russian as an adult. I used a lot of this declarative explanatory system. I practiced a lot with it, so I got better at using my intuitive, I got faster. But I first learned, and in fact, we first learned a foreign language as an adult, largely using that hippocampal slow system. This is why when you learn a language as an adult, you're often slower at speaking this language. Even when you practice a whole bunch, you're not quite as natural as someone who has learned it as an infant or toddler. And so this system, in fact, is very powerful in infants and toddlers and younger children, but it becomes less powerful as students start going into adolescence. That's when this system comes on stronger. Actually, this is a system that's heavily dependent on working memory. So this afternoon, I will talk about the differences between these two systems when it comes to neurodiversity. So if you're lucky enough to attend this afternoon session, you will learn more about it there. Interestingly, in adults who have Alzheimer's, gradually destroys their hippocampus. So I'm saying that this system is largely like a large language model and how it's trained. And it's like it in a very important way. It's not conscious. This system seems to be more related to consciousness. So what happens when this system is destroyed in Alzheimer's patients? I know my father died of Alzheimer's. He would come to me and he would say, "Your brother, what's your brother doing right beside you?" And I'm like, "There's no brother here." He would confabulate. He'd make things up. And that's what we see in large language models. They make things up. They're like the perfect assistant, except that they're occasionally a little psychopathic. So you might say, well, is it eventually going to be human-like? Right now, this is more or less chain of thought reasoning. They're trying to emulate human reasoning by using something called chain of thought. But it turns out that the chain of thought being used in AI research is really very fundamentally different somehow from how humans do chain of thought reasoning. So we're quite a ways, it seems now, from this whole, from making something really consciously human-like in its intelligence. But I want to also show you how this relates to everyday classrooms, whether at a college level or a primary level, whatever level you're at. So this basal ganglia system is experiential learning. It's more or less like active learning. And this declarative is like lecture. So we can say we've got lecture, that's that declarative slow system, the explanatory system, and then we've got active student-centered learning, more like involving more the basal ganglia. So what have we been told by expert educators over the last 50 years? Lecture is bad. We shouldn't be doing it. That's half of how people really learn effectively. You're learning effectively, I hope, in part because I'm lecturing. Now, what research has shown is that the very best way of teaching effectively is actually to mix a little lecture with a little active learning. So what should it be? Should it be a lot of lecture and a little active learning, or a lot of active learning and a little lecture, or something that's 50-50? Well, it depends on the student's prior knowledge, on the subject matter, the age of the students, so all sorts of different things. So you can't have a hard and fast rule. In fact, for me, being here, I'm only in Singapore for like a little bit. So you might be saying, well, why aren't you mixing lecture with active learning? Part of it is simply, I am only here for a while, and every bit of active learning I do with you reduces how much I can share through lecture. So those who do active learning, they'll often say, oh no, you can still cover all the same material, even with including active exercises. No, you can't. Just let's use common sense. And what I'm doing is what many individuals do. I'm sharing as much as I can now, and I'm hoping that you will go off and actively use these ideas as you are teaching or working. However, I have snuck in a little bit of active learning, right? So it's like fast, slow, and we'll do a little bit more here later on. So there are ways you can integrate even short interludes of active learning. But this mixture of active learning with lecture is called direct instruction. Notice, direct instruction is not the same as lecture. People who don't know, and this includes even top educators, will say, oh, don't do direct instruction. It's just really boring. But they don't know that direct instruction includes active learning within it. I do have to tell you about, so I have one friend, he's super smart. He's a professor at an unnamed university. He gave me this book that he had written with the help of ChatGPT. So proud of it. And I read all 260 pages of it, and I have to say, it was the worst book I have ever read. It had flat dialogue, predictable plot. The writing just was terrible. How could my very intelligent friend have given me such a thing? Well, he had ChatGPT helping him. He trusted ChatGPT. Now, I was friends with a writer named Cormac McCarthy. He's a brilliant Pulitzer Prize-winning writer. And what Cormac would tell me was, to be a good writer, you must read, read, read. You must get a sense of the genre, the literature, how to structure things. In some sense, it's very like my daughter getting the multiplication tables and a sense of the numbers. Well, my friend he was very good at his discipline, but he hadn't read widely, and he didn't know what good writing really meant. So when ChatGPT gave him something, he didn't have those links in his long-term memory. He just thought, it looks really good. And so he gave it to me. And I gave him my 2 cents worth. But people often, during this time period, they would often say, and I teach critical thinking. We really teach critical thinking here. Critical thinking starts with facts inside yourself, knowledge within yourself. And so at an unnamed university, I created a course. And as I submitted this course, they told me, if you'd like, you can have this course labeled as a critical thinking course, and then the students can get credit for critical thinking and learning about critical thinking. So I asked, what's the definition of critical thinking so I can make sure that my course actually fits it? They didn't have one. It was just, if I felt like critical thinking was part of the course, I could call it a critical thinking course. And so often, people will use critical thinking as a way of making their work sound good, but if they don't have facts and an emphasis on facts, it's kind of not really critical thinking. There's something called the 85% rule for optimal learning. What this is a little, it's kind of saying that if students are trying to learn something, they've got to be able to figure things out or get things right about 85% of the time. Otherwise, they can become demoralized and discouraged. So that is an important idea to carry forth here. Now, I want to mention the value of getting people curious, right? Okay, so the value of good hooks. So let's talk about dopamine. The dopamine is one of my favorite chemicals, but I try to avoid getting too much of it because, well, it's what causes gambling addiction and all those kinds of things. It's often called the feel-good molecule, but it's an anticipatory molecule. It's kind of like you're anticipating getting something good. And dopamine is put out by the dopamine neurons in the ventral tegmental area that can go anywhere in the brain, but it can particularly go to some place where if you are curious about a problem or an idea or a concept and you're trying to figure something out, dopamine, if you're curious about it, dopamine is like hanging out in that area. So interestingly, little mice that get their dopamine systems inactivated can't learn anything new. So there's something really valuable about dopamine. And so what is that thing that makes dopamine so valuable? If you look, let's say that you've got your student really curious. For some reason, you got them kind of hooked. And so they start trying to solve a problem, and they can't get the solution, but they're curious about it, so they keep trying. And even though they're still struggling and they don't get the solution, they keep trying, and eventually they get it. They look in the book, and they look at the answer. Oh, they got the right answer. They feel so good. It's like that aha. And that aha, that feeling of I got it, what that does is that is also affiliated with little dopamine molecules going in between the neurons, and that is what links together those neurons, the linked clump of neurons of something that you're learning. So this tells us that curiosity is a really good motivator, and it's something we want to be using in our classes. So how can we provoke curiosity? You know, just ask ChatGPT. So I have to say, okay, so I was in Mongolia, and I was riding like the world's ugliest horse. He was such a cute little guy. I mean, he's really a tough little Mongolian pony. And when I was there, the Mongolian professors in Ulaanbaatar, they would tell me, we are city professors. We really do not understand our students who are coming off of the Mongolian steppe. How can we hook them? How can we get them curious? We don't even understand their lives, really. Simple. Just tell ChatGPT about the attributes of the students, and guess what? When it comes to Python programming, you can come up with really nice metaphors in terms of yurts and migratory patterns and goats and things that the students are very familiar with. Sometimes I say generative AI is like dynamite. Dynamite is wonderful. It can really help me as a construction expert to quickly excavate holes. But, putting dynamite in the hands of students, it's also really dangerous, potentially, if they don't know what they're doing. But so I do want to emphasize that prior knowledge is often critical, and we neglect prior knowledge and the importance of prior knowledge. Let's say that I wanted you to remember this sentence. I want you to write this down 10 minutes from now, and just remember it. Well, what's the problem? Zilyony pingvin jest яблоко. It's super easy if you speak Russian. So I have a lot of, prior knowledge. I know it says the green penguin is eating an apple, but I could remember and write that in 10 minutes, no problem. Whereas you, without that prior knowledge, and it's not like I'm some freaking genius or something, it's just I've got prior knowledge. And so the thing is, we want to keep in mind that prior knowledge is really important. Right now, you have students with a lot of prior knowledge because they haven't been exposed necessarily to ChatGPT for all that long. But soon, you're going to start getting cadres of students who've grown up with ChatGPT. Unless we teach students how their brain learns, they can easily be seduced by the ease with which ChatGPT can answer questions, and they simply can't understand why you're making their lives more miserable by asking them to actually learn something. So let's just do a little quick review of working memory, long-term memory, and octopuses, because I know you want to know about these things. So here we go. Working memory has like 4 arms. If you represent it by an octopus or a quadrupus with 4 arms, it can hold 4 things in hand in that working memory, 4 pieces of information. So we've got 4 pieces of information, and that's working memory. Long-term memory is like lockers, that are filled with sets of links that we've stored in long-term memory. So when you're learning something new, of course, your working memory is creating these nice long sets of neural links that you store in long-term memory so that later you can pull them to mind whenever you might need them. And this brings me to my younger daughter, Rachel. So Rachel is going to model for us here. Oh, she's the one. She's the artist. Yeah. So she's modeling for us what it felt like when she was first learning to back up a car. So look at her little face. It's like, do I look here? No, do I look there? Wait, no, what? And then kind of off she goes into a ditch. But when Rachel was first learning to back up a car, she had a heavy cognitive load. And there wasn't really any room for, all her arms were taken up and busy, so she couldn't think about anything else. But once she learned how to back up a car, she could just kind of go, oh, I want to back up a car. She pulls those links to mind, and she has a light cognitive load. She can even think about things like, are my seatbelts fastened, or what's the music? And she's got working memory available for more complex thinking. Ultimately, we want our students to be able to hop up to our tests. They've done lots of practice, and so then they can easily pull links to mind and put them together creatively in order to solve a problem. Now, if a student hasn't created those links in long-term memory, they will sit down to the test and they will suddenly learn they don't have those links in long-term memory. And they can come to you and say, I suffer from test anxiety. I really knew the material, but actually they didn't know the material because we didn't teach them. But if you look at working memory, our limitation is that we have 4 arms, where on average, okay, Singapore, you have 8 arms, okay. But it's a limited number. And the thing is, though, generative AI gives us the ability to have tens of thousands of arms. We can suddenly kind of have access in our working memory to many, many more ideas than we ever did before. But we have to beware. And I'll show you some more about this coming up. How do we use that declarative system? So here's these declarative links, like what you're learning here right now, going in through the declarative system. How do we create those automatic system links? It turns out that if we practice something enough times, part of the prefrontal cortex is looking, and that infralimbic cortex is going, hey, are you doing this over and over again? Because if you are, it creates these new sets of links, those automatic links. So it's only through a lot of practice that these new automatic links can gradually be acquired. When I am typing on a keyboard, I can type really fast. It's Kahneman's fast typing. But I had to repeat over and over and over again as I was learning to type in order to gradually build, and take something from that declarative system into that basal ganglia automatic system. Now, we've got a little bit of a sense of what's going on as we're gradually practicing and learning something. And I would ask you, where is knowledge? Where is skills in all of this? Aren't you, often around the world I am told, well, we have knowledge and we have skills. But you know what? Brain does not work that way. There's no such thing as there's a knowledge part of the brain and a skills part of the brain. I mean, in some sense, skills can be basal ganglia related, but that's also how you get knowledge in there, through a lot of practice. So sometimes I'm disappointed because I feel that education nowadays is like medicine used to be 200 years ago. It's not research-based, it's not evidence-based, and people who actually know nothing about the neuroscience of how the brain learns will come up with things like, hey, we've got to, it's either knowledge-based or skills-based, but they have no idea what they're really talking about. And so then educators really struggle because they're like, is this knowledge or is this skills? And that's a legitimate question. What's I think most important is if you look at education, oftentimes those in schools of education, they have spent 10, 20, 30 years focusing on the great leaders of the past. That's what they teach. But that's not where the world is at anymore. Every one of these great leaders, what you can do is you can point to one little thing or a couple little things they got right, and you can point to dozens of things that they got wrong. But nobody ever talks about that. Look, I love Maria Montessori. We had our children in Montessori schools. She thought that the way children learn, which is through that basal ganglia system more often, is the way we should be teaching adults as well. She didn't know at that time about the declarative hippocampal system. And so we're often being told, to follow certain strategies that were developed by leaders of the past that really are irrelevant to what we should be teaching about today. One thing that makes me kind of laugh is, what if we taught other subjects the way we teach neuroscience in education? Well, how do we teach neuroscience in education? Neuromyths, right? Myths about neuroscience. Oh, there's left brain and right brain. We know that's not true. Learning styles, we know that's not true. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah. What if we taught math myths? That's all, the only way we taught about math was through myths or history or biology. Teaching neuromyths is not teaching about neuroscience. What I'm talking about here today is about real neuroscience. That it's not just, the amygdala, you want your students not to be stressed because that amygdala will be activated. That's a lot of what I see in educational research. Neuromyths and don't upset the amygdala. And all these things that are critical for learning are being overlooked. Yeah, I do have to mention, there is a book that is, but I also want to give you a little tip about using generative AI. So when I was working on this book, so I put it together with my wonderful co-authors, and they asked me to write the Japanese foreword for the book. What the heck? I don't know, and then they asked me to write the Spanish foreword, and then the Kazakh foreword. I don't know about any of these things, So what did I do? I put the whole manuscript, PDF of my book or our book into Claude and asked it to look up, for example, the Kazakh educational system and to tell me what this book does that enhances the approach already being used in Kazakhstan, but also what information in this book is actually fresh and important for those in Kazakhstan to know. I got all this stuff back, wrote the foreword, and sent it to some of my friends who are Kazakh, and sent it to the editor, and the editor's like, oh, how do you know so much about the Kazakh educational system? I do want to show you a little trick. There's something called a text expander. And the text expander I use, I get no money from this, so, is called abbreviate.io. And what this does is I put in, let's see if I've got this here. I put in .c right there. I just type this in because I've set up my text expander with that. And it automatically will give me this wonderful condensation of whatever research article I am trying to understand. And I hate to say this, but sometimes I will wade my entire way through a research article, and then I will do a little condensation, and I'll pick up ideas that I didn't get on my own first read through that research paper. So if you use this text expander, you can simply type in whatever, abbreviation you want, and then you can ask Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini or whatever to create whatever you want. So let's see. So let's kind of wrap up here with the idea of scaffolding. Scaffolding means kind of making presenting ideas in smaller chunks or in ways that students can perceive smaller chunks. Now remember this 85% rule. We want students to learn things without getting too much stuff wrong. So, if you kind of think of it like this, it's like if students can get things right 85% of the time, their little neural links can easily jump over that goalpost. So this is an important idea. We're going to put all these ideas together along with this idea. Have you ever gone in your car and you stop the car and then your GPS says, turn north? And you're like, I don't even know where south is. So I like my iPhone. If you see, I can kind of point my iPhone and it'll give me at least a direction. That's kind of what we need to be doing as teachers. So if we go back and we're looking again at that idea of the neural schema, that collected, connected set of neurons that underpins our expertise in practically anything. So here we go. There's our schema. And if we look at our schema, there's 86 billion neurons in the brain, but there are 100 trillion neural connections. This means if I'm even using just a tiny part of my brain, this is trying to represent the many neural connections that are possible. Even if I'm using just a tiny part of my brain, there can be trillions of connections. That means that if I put students down in a group and I say, okay, student-centered learning, you figured this thing out. Remember, it took millions of humans, thousands of years to even come up with the idea of the zero. When we teachers already know the answer. We know the neural pathway, so it seems simple and obvious to us. But when we sit students down, here's what they do. They go, oh, okay, well, do I look here? No, wait, no, maybe I look here. Oh, should I go here or here? Am I supposed to? What is my teacher asking me to do? So it's often really confusing. And what you want to do, here's what a good teacher will do, is they will narrow the possibilities for the solution space by asking a question. This is sometimes called a Socratic dialogue. And what this can do is when you kind of point them which way to go, it's a smaller space. So then they are looking, but they're looking around in a smaller space. And it's easier for them to go, aha, I made the connection. Guess what? They think they did it. And in a sense, they did do it. You narrowed the space for them, but they did make that connection. And that gives them that little dopamine hit that helps to solidify the connections. So let's contrast this with simple memorization. Simple memorization can have its place. For example, if I am memorizing vocabulary words in a new language and so forth. But often when we're asking students to think creatively, we want them to be able to kind of get used to searching around and making those connections themselves, rather than simply giving them a formula to memorize. So ultimately then, we can use this idea of questions or dialogue. We can tighten by asking a more pointed question, or we can do something like this. There's a school in Canada where they ended at the end of the year with this kind of result. They started with this extraordinarily broad set of this is their scores on a math test, a typical math test. this is how they ended at the end of the year. They did not move backwards. They moved forwards. And they did it by using the ideas that I'm just talking about. And I'll very quickly just move you through this. Let's say we've got 72 cents. So we've got 72 cents, and I want to teach the idea of division using Socratic questioning. Okay, so we're going to abbreviate the 10 cent with 10 cent pieces. Those are 10 cent pieces. So we've got 72 cents, and we want to divide 72 cents amongst 3 students. So if we're trying to do that, we know we kind of take these, 2 10-cent pieces per. Now we've got a 10-cent piece and a penny left over. If I give the 10-cent piece to Sarah and a penny to Zoltan and a penny to Beatrice, I've got it all done, right? Something wrong with that picture. And when I ask that question to students, I'm clearly illustrating that I can mess up. And I'm asking them to correct me. This is a way of beginning to teach about division. What does the 3 stand for here? 3 students. Yep. So we've got our 3 students. Now, if we go with the algorithm, what does the 2 stand for? I'm Socratically questioning you. Okay, so we've got our 2 per student. Okay, and then what does the -6 stand for? Yeah, it's that I've got 2 given to each one, so I've given 60 cents away. So I've moved a little bit through that space to allow students to make some connections themselves as they're answering questions. We're going very swiftly here, but in a division class for kids, you wouldn't go, you'd be making sure everyone was involved. And you can use this kind of idea, though, even in very advanced classes. So going back to our algorithm, we have the 1, and of course, that's our 10-cent piece. Now, here's something that even adults often miss about the division algorithm. What is this step here where I am bringing down the 2? What am I really doing? Okay, you're searching neural space. It's actually too big. That's too complicated a question. But I would go into it a little bit with my class, and the ultimate idea is that this bringing down step is actually regrouping. I'm going to 12 cents as opposed to, what I had before with the 10-cent pieces. So there's a way to visually show and give students a feel for the algorithm instead of just memorizing the algorithm. And what's the 4? 4 here is what? Help me. Help me, Obi-Wan. Okay, so yep, 4 going out to each student. And what's the -12? I've just given out our 12 right here. And then what's the 0? 0 left over. So what I've really just done is I've used questions to narrow that space. But of course, ultimately, we want our students to be able to go into very broad areas and make novel connections themselves and see even complex different things that they can creatively put together. But let's go back here for just a minute. What if I use ChatGPT to help me see how something creative to put together? It works. It does help me. If I already have those links to put together in my own brain. So this is a perfect example of, yes, ChatGPT can help you be more creative, but I can give the best new theory of physics in the world to a poet, and a poet won't have the background to understand. They don't have these inside them, and vice versa. A great poet can give some great poetry to a physicist, and they kind of go, huh? So ultimately, then, we want to ensure for our students that they're creating these nice links as they're learning, that they can retrieve and practice with those ideas. And so that helps them to create those nice sets of links. So retrieval practice, of course, is really quite important. Just a quick little aside here. I like to use a flashcard system. So like on Coursera, what I do is I use this flashcard system called smarterhumans.ai. I don't think I put that there. Anyway, that's what it is, smarterhumans.ai. Watch what this is, though. Oh, there it is. It's a web clipper. And what you can do is, like, I put this onto one of my videos, and I click this additional video actions, and look at this. I can create an AI set of flashcards about whatever I'm learning. And it's actually really cool. So I can edit them. I can, so whatever I'm learning, I can upload papers, electronic papers, have it create flashcards. And every day, I kid you not, unless I'm really, really tired, I will go over like 15, 20 new flashcards about things I'm learning. I'll upload a paper and create flashcards. And it works really, really well. Ultimately, then, I just want to, there's a very, the great idea here is it's possible to teach even really complicated ideas using very simple visuals, but it takes a long time to create. Ultimately, student-centered learning really is important, but great teaching matters a lot. And working together, we can put education on a great new neuroscientific foundation. And ultimately, we always want to remember AI shows, but I'm the only one who knows. So with that, I thank you. And this has my slides, so feel free to steal my slides, use my slides. It also has a much deeper paper called the memory paradox, which is that's one of the most popular downloaded papers on SSRN right now. And I'll be working next year to bring in, with Terry Sinowski, a cadre of some 50 neuroscientists and top AI experts to really found this new field of how do you truly learn in an era where cognitive offloading is so tempting. So thank you very much again.